The air in the arrival hall always smelled the same. A sterile metallic tang mixed with the faint, cloying scent of lilies. A scent of beginnings that felt unnervingly like an end. Elias stood behind the thick, soundproof glass of the viewing gallery, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. Below, in the stark white chamber, the process had begun. A low hum vibrated through the floor, a sound that settled deep in your bones, a resonant frequency that was the world's first lullaby and its final dirge. A soft, shimmering light began to coalesce in the center of the room, like heat haze on a summer road. It thickened, pulsed, and slowly, agonizingly, took on a human form. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady, indifferent hum of the chamber. He was 42, in the prime of his life. His body was a well-oiled machine, his mind a library of experiences, a fortress of carefully curated knowledge. But today he felt as frail as the man now materializing from the light. An old man, stooped and thin, with skin like crumpled parchment and a bewildered look in his watery, pale blue eyes. He wore the simple grey tunic of an arrived, his hands trembling as he looked down at them, as if they were foreign objects. Elias felt a surge of pity, of terror, and of a strange, fierce love that was so new it felt like a wound. This man, this stranger with the face of a nonagenarian, was his son. The light faded. The hum ceased. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the old man's shuddering breath. Med-techs in soft-soled shoes entered the chamber, their movements gentle, practiced. They spoke in low, soothing tones, guiding the man to a chair, checking his vitals, offering him a glass of water that he struggled to hold. Elias watched, his own breath caught in his throat. He had been through this before, 20 years ago when Maya had arrived. He'd been a young man of 62 then, his own body beginning its slow, inexorable journey toward strength. But his mind was already a repository of decades. He had looked at the old woman who was his daughter and felt a profound sense of duty. But this felt different. At 42, he was at the apex of his existence. He was supposed to be building a life, not starting a new, slow-motion farewell. His wife, Lena, squeezed his hand. Her touch was an anchor in the swirling sea of his emotions. She was 45, her face etched with the faint, beautiful lines of a life lived with grace, lines that were slowly smoothing out year by year. "He has your eyes, Elias," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Elias looked again, past the cataracts, past the confusion, and saw it. The same shade of deep, stormy grey that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. It was a cruel, beautiful detail, a genetic echo across an impossible gulf of time. They called it the unwinding, a poetic term for a brutal reality. You arrived old, a blank slate in a failing body, your mind a tabula rasa equipped only with the basic instincts for survival and language. Your family, younger than you, would take you in. They would teach you your own history, read you your life story from the legacy journals they had painstakingly prepared. They would care for you as your body slowly mended, as you grew stronger, more vibrant, shedding age like a snake shedding its skin. You would reach a glorious peak of health and intellect in your 30s and 40s, the vibrant summer of your life. Then, the slide would begin again. You would grow younger, smaller. Your hard-won knowledge would start to fray. Your memories would simplify, then dissolve into the mists of childhood. You would be cared for by your own children, who were now adults in their prime. You would go to school, then kindergarten, and finally, you would reach infancy, the great forgetting, before you simply faded. A peaceful, silent disappearance from the world. A life lived from dusk to dawn. The medtechs were leading his son out of the chamber now. They would take him to the integration wing where he would spend a few days adjusting before coming home. Home. The word felt alien. How do you bring home a father who is your son? A child who wears the face of your grandfather? Elias and Lena left the viewing gallery and walked down the long, silent corridor. The walls were lined with portraits of arrivals from generations past, faces wrinkled with age, all wearing that same look of profound, heartbreaking confusion. A museum of reverse decay. "We need to finish his journal," Lena said softly, her practical nature a balm on his frayed nerves. "We only have the outlines. We need to fill in the details of the life we've planned for him." The life they had planned. That was the tradition. Before a child arrived, the parents would write their history. They would invent a past for them. A career, hobbies, friendships, triumphs, failures. A narrative to anchor their empty minds. It was an act of love, a gift of identity. But as Elias walked out into the cool evening air, the weight of that task felt crushing. He would write stories of a life his son had never lived. He would describe a wife his son had never met, who had faded 30 years ago. He would create a tapestry of memories that were nothing more than beautiful, intricate lies. They got into their car, the engine a quiet hum in the deepening twilight. Lena was looking at a data pad, already scrolling through name suggestions. "What about Adam?" she asked. "It means man, the first man." Elias didn't answer. He was watching the city lights blur past the window. He saw a group of teenagers, their bodies brimming with the clumsy energy of their 15 years, laughing and shouting. Soon, they would be children. He saw a man in his late 50s walking slowly with a cane, his mind sharp and full of wisdom, his body beginning its betrayal. Everyone moving in the same direction, yet on entirely different journeys. The system was supposed to be merciful. There was no sudden, violent death. No tragic accidents cutting life short in its prime. There was only the gentle, predictable slope of the unwinding. You said your goodbyes over decades. You grieved for people who were still walking, talking, laughing. It was a slow, managed sorrow. But tonight, staring into the bewildered eyes of his newborn son, Elias didn't feel mercy. He felt a profound, cosmic cruelty. He was expected to love this frail old man as his child, to pour his heart and soul into him, knowing that every day of renewed strength, every moment of reclaimed youth, was just one more step toward the day his son would look at him with the blank, unrecognizing eyes of an infant. The memories Elias had so carefully constructed for him erased forever. Lena touched his arm, her brow furrowed with concern. "Elias, what are you thinking?" He turned to her, the city lights reflecting in his haunted eyes. "I was thinking about goodbyes, Lena," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We just said hello to our son, and in the very same breath, we began the longest goodbye in the world." She had no answer for that. She just held his hand tighter as they drove home to a house that was about to become a sanctuary and a prison, a place of love and of anticipatory grief. As they pulled into their driveway, a light flicked on in an upstairs window. It was the room of his father, Samuel, a vibrant 25-year-old who barely remembered being Elias's parent. Another goodbye, already in progress. And as Elias looked at his home, a single, terrifying question began to bloom in the silence of his mind. How do you build a future when your own past is waiting to erase you? And how can you pour your soul into a love that is designed, from its very first moment, to be forgotten? The morning sun, thin and pale as watered-down milk, streamed into the kitchen. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, forgotten world. For Elias, mornings were a ritual of reverse chronology. He started with the oldest. Maya, his daughter, was 78. Her arrival 20 years prior was a memory both sharp and distant for Elias. He'd been 62, his own joints aching with the phantom pains of an age he was steadily leaving behind. Now he was the strong one. He entered her room, a space filled with the scent of lavender and old paper. She was sitting by the window, a thick blanket pooled around her withered frame, her gaze lost in the branches of the ancient oak tree outside. "Good morning, Maya," Elias said softly, his voice gentle, the way one speaks to a frightened bird. She turned her head slowly, her eyes, clouded with the mists of her 98 years of physical existence, struggling to focus. "Elias," she breathed, a flicker of recognition in their depths. "I was just remembering. The sunlight. It reminded me of the park by the old university. We used to walk there, didn't we? Your mother and I." Elias's heart gave a painful twist. Maya's mother, Ilara, had faded over a decade ago. Maya was referring to a memory from her journal, a story Elias himself had written for her, a fiction she now clung to as truth. "Yes, we did," he lied, his voice smooth and reassuring. "You loved the rose garden." He helped her to her feet, his strong arms easily taking her meager weight. Her body was a fragile cage of bones, but with each passing month, a subtle change was occurring. A little more flesh on her arms, a little more color in her cheeks. The unwinding was a slow, relentless spring. Her body was healing, preparing for a youth she would have no memory of her adulthood to appreciate. He helped her with her morning regimen, the nutrient supplements, the gentle physiotherapy. It was a slow, meticulous process, a daily act of devotion to a person who was both his progeny and his ward. Next, he would check on Samuel, his father. Samuel's room was on the other side of the house, and the contrast was a form of temporal whiplash. Music, loud and defiant, pulsed from behind the closed door. Elias knocked. "Sam?" The door flew open. Samuel stood there, a whirlwind of youthful energy. At 25, he was beautiful. His body was lean and powerful, his eyes sharp and clear, the last vestiges of elderly wisdom replaced by the fiery immediacy of youth. He had a tattoo of a spiraling serpent coiling up his arm, a recent acquisition that Elias had tried to argue against. "It's my skin, Eli," Samuel had retorted, his tone sharp. "Not yours to curate." "Morning," Elias said, forcing a smile. "Big plans today?" "Going out with Kira," Samuel said, pulling on a leather jacket. "We might go cliff diving over at the quarries." Elias's smile tightened. "Sam, that's dangerous. You know your body is still settling. You're not invincible." Samuel rolled his eyes, a gesture of pure, unadulterated youthful impatience. "Right, the lecture. I'm not a child, Elias." The irony of the statement was a chasm between them. Elias was the child, biologically, yet he held all the responsibility, all the memory. Samuel was the father, yet he was shedding that past like an unwanted coat. "I know you're not," Elias said, his voice softer. I remember when you taught me to swim. You were so careful. You held my head above the water and told me to respect the ocean, not to fight it." Samuel's face went blank for a fraction of a second. The memory was gone. Elias could see it in his eyes, the faint flicker of confusion, the effort to grasp a phantom. "Yeah, well," he mumbled, looking away. "Guess I was a different person then." He clapped Elias on the shoulder, a a gesture that was meant to be reassuring but felt like a dismissal. "Don't wait up." He bounded down the stairs, the front door slamming behind him, leaving Elias standing in the echoing silence of the hallway. He was a different person. That was the simple, devastating truth. The wise, patient man who had raised Elias, who had taught him philosophy and carpentry and how to mend a broken heart, was gone. In his place was this vibrant, reckless stranger who shared his face. This was the architecture of their world, an existence built on the scaffolding of forgetting. You spent the first half of your life as a student, learning your own fabricated past. You became a historian of your own self. Then you spent the second half as a curator, tending to the fading memories of your loved ones. Love was an act of constant, painful translation, translating the person they were into the person they are, and grieving for the difference. Elias finally made his way to his study. This room was his sanctuary. Books lined the walls, not just stories, but legacy journals from his own ancestors. He was a memory archivist for the city, a profession that was as sacred as it was sorrowful. His job was to digitize and preserve the journals, to ensure that the fictional histories of generations were not lost. He worked with fading ink, brittle paper, and corrupted data files, a warrior fighting a losing battle against entropy. He sat at his desk and looked at the blank journal for his new son, Adam. Adam. He would have to start writing soon. He would invent a childhood in a city that no longer existed, a career as an astronomer who charted distant dead stars. He would write of a great love, a woman named Lyra, and of the heartbreak of her fading. He would build a palace of beautiful lies, and for the next few decades, he and Lena would be its devoted caretakers. Later that evening, after Maya was asleep and the house was quiet, Lena found him still in his study, staring at the empty page. She came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders, resting her cheek on his head. Her hair, which was slowly regaining its dark, lustrous sheen, smelled of jasmine. "It's hard, isn't it?" she murmured. "The first page." "It feels like a betrayal," Elias confessed, his voice rough. "We're not giving him a life. We're giving him a cage. A story he's trapped in until he's young enough to forget it." "Is a world without stories better?" Lena countered gently. "Imagine arriving into nothing. No name, no history. Just a decaying body and a terrifying void. We give them an anchor, Elias. We give them a self to hold on to as they cross the great expanse. It's the kindest thing we can do." He knew she was right. It was the philosophy they were all raised on. The benevolent lie was the pillar of their civilization. But the discovery of his own son had cracked that pillar, revealing the hollowness inside. He turned in his chair to face her, taking her hands in his. Her hands were smoother than they had been a decade ago, the cartography of wrinkles slowly being erased. "I love you, Lena," he said, the words feeling intensely, desperately important. "I remember the day we met, at the midlife gala. You were 60. You were wearing a silver dress. You quoted Theron's philosophy of unbecoming, and I was captivated." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that made his heart ache. "And you were 58, pretending to be interested in hydroponic gardening to impress me. I remember." They held each other's gaze, and in that moment, their shared past was a real, tangible thing, a world of its own, vibrant and full of light. But he could already see the shadow of the future. The years would pass. They would become 30, then 20. Would they still remember this moment? Or would it be just a faint, instinctual warmth, a sense of familiarity without a source? And then they would be 10, and 5, and the shared world they had built would crumble into dust, and they would be two strangers in adjacent playpens. The love he felt for her was the most real thing in his life. But in their world, what was the half-life of love? How many years before it decayed into something unrecognizable? "Promise me something," Elias whispered, pulling her closer. "Promise me we'll fight it. We'll write everything down. Not just for our children, but for us. We'll read to each other every single day to keep the memories alive for as long as we can." "I promise," Lena said, her voice catching. "For as long as we can." But as he held her, the words echoed in his mind. For as long as we can. It wasn't a promise of forever. It was an admission of defeat. They were not warriors against the dying of the light. They were just librarians, cataloguing the darkness as it fell. And as he thought of the blank book on his desk, and the old man sleeping in the sterile room at the arrival hall, he felt a chilling premonition. They were all living inside a story someone else had written, a grand, cosmic narrative of unwinding and forgetting. But what if the story wasn't true? What if the architecture of their world, this entire system of managed sorrow, was built on a foundation far more complex and terrifying than a simple, benevolent lie? Elias's dreams were a tangled mess of temporality. He dreamt of holding his son, Adam, a tiny infant, only to have him wither into an old man in his arms, his baby's cry turning into a rattling death cough. He dreamt of his father, Samuel, not as the reckless youth he was now, but as the wise 70-year-old he had been when Elias was a boy of 50. In the dream, Samuel would hand him a beautifully carved wooden box and say, "Everything you need to remember is inside, my son. Don't let them take it from you." But when Elias opened the box, it was filled with nothing but sand, which trickled through his fingers no matter how tightly he clenched his fist. He would always wake with a gasp, the scent of dust and ozone in his nostrils, his heart pounding with a nameless dread. This dread was his constant companion, a shadow that clung to him even in the brightest daylight. It was the fear of the void, not his own final, infantile fade into nothingness, that seemed a distant, peaceful prospect, but the void that was slowly consuming his loved ones. His deepest, most primal fear was not of disappearing, but of forgetting. Specifically, of forgetting Lena. He imagined a day, 20 years from now, when he would be a boy of 22 and she a young woman of 25. They might pass on the street, and he would feel a strange pang of something, a fleeting sense of déjà vu, but he would not know her. The architect of his soul, the co-author of his life, would be a stranger. The thought was a physical pain, a cold knot in the pit of his stomach that never fully dissolved. His dream, the secret, foolish hope he harbored in the deepest recess of his heart, was the inverse of his fear. He dreamt of a flaw in the system, a loophole, a way to anchor a memory so deeply that the unwinding couldn't erase it. He envisioned a method, a technology, a forgotten piece of philosophy that could preserve the core of a person's identity, a single, indelible memory that would survive the journey back to the dawn. A memory of love. If he could just save one moment with Lena, one perfect, crystalline memory, and carry it with him into the great forgetting, then the entire cycle would have meaning. It was a romantic, impossible notion, the kind of hope that could drive a man mad. This internal conflict, the terror of forgetting versus the desperate hope of remembering, was the engine of his life. It dictated his every action. His meticulous care for Maya was an attempt to honor the memories she was losing. His arguments with Samuel were a desperate plea for the ghost of his father to resurface from within the brash young man. And his work as a memory archivist had become more than a job. It was a crusade. He wasn't just preserving civic records, he was searching for a clue, a breadcrumb left by some long-faded ancestor who might have felt the same way, who might have found an answer. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the turmoil of his home life, he immersed himself in the digital archives. He was supposed to be restoring a set of second-cycle journals from a coastal settlement, but his mind drifted. On a whim, he ran a search query, a string of keywords he had never dared to combine before: memory, preservation, cycle, failure, anomaly. The system whirred. The search was flagged as restricted, access denied. This was not unusual. Certain historical records were sealed for civic stability. But this time, something was different. A secondary prompt appeared on his screen, a simple text-based interface that looked ancient. It read, "Janus Protocol, state your query's intent." His breath caught. The Janus Protocol was a myth, a boogeyman for archivists. Legend said it was a fail-safe system designed by the first cyclers, an AI that monitored the integrity of the world's core programming. No one had accessed it in centuries. Trembling slightly, Elias typed, "Investigating the philosophical and biological limits of memory decay during unwinding." He expected another denial. Instead, a single file was decrypted and opened on his screen. It wasn't a journal. It was a private log, written in a stark, clinical prose. The author was a woman named Dr. Aris Thorne, dated from the very dawn of the first cycle. Elias's eyes scanned the text, his heart beginning to pound. Log entry 734. The unwinding protocol is stable. The initial population has arrived and is integrating with their designated families. The induced retrograde amnesia is holding firm. No subjects have shown any recall of their pre-cycle existence. The Legacy Journal initiative has been surprisingly effective as a psychosocial anchor. They are building their own cages and calling them homes. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. Induced retrograde amnesia. Pre-cycle existence. These were not the words of someone observing a natural phenomenon. These were the words of an engineer. He read on, his horror mounting with every line. Log entry 735. There is, however, an anomaly. Subject 7, designated Orion, shows signs of what we are calling phantom memory resonance. During REM sleep, his neural activity mirrors patterns not from his fabricated journal, but from his pre-cycle life. He speaks a name, Seraphina, that does not exist in his given history. The emotional response is profound. Grief, longing. The system was designed to erase this, to spare them this. The pain of loss was the very thing we sought to eliminate. Log entry 736. We have decided against intervention. The resonance is weak, manifesting only in dreams. It poses no threat to the stability of the cycle. But it raises a philosophical question that haunts me. We built this gilded cage to protect humanity from the sharp edges of grief and the finality of death. We gave them a gentle, circular path, a life of managed hellos and prolonged goodbyes. We called it mercy. But if a ghost of a true memory can survive this great erasure, a love so powerful it echoes across the void we created, did we save them? Or did we rob them of the one thing that made them truly human? The capacity to love so much that it hurts, to remember even when it breaks you. Elias leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. The world wasn't a natural state. The unwinding wasn't a law of physics. It was a program, an artificial construct, a gilded cage built by their own ancestors to escape. Pain? Grief? They had chosen this. They had traded the messy, unpredictable, painful beauty of a linear life for this orderly, predictable, sterile loop. And the great forgetting wasn't a gentle fading. It was a deliberate, systematic erasure. He thought of his dream, of Samuel and the box of sand. Don't let them take it from you. It wasn't a warning about time. It was a warning about the system itself. He thought of his impossible hope to preserve a single memory. Dr. Thorne's log suggested it might not be impossible. A love so powerful it echoes, a ghost in the machine. He felt a surge of something hot and unfamiliar in his chest. It wasn't dread. It was anger, a profound, righteous fury. His entire life, his love for Lena, his grief for his father, his duty to his daughter, it was all playing out on a stage someone else had built, according to a script someone else had written. They weren't just living a lie. They were living in one. He looked around the archive, at the endless rows of data stacks containing the stories, the beautiful, heartbreaking fictions of millions of lives. It was not a library of fading selves. It was a cemetery of stolen truths. Every journal was a headstone for a real life that had been erased, a real love that had been forgotten. He closed the file, the screen returning to his normal work interface. But the world outside his monitor would never look the same. The gentle hum of the city, the laughter of children in the park, the slow walk of the elderly, it was all part of the program. A grand, elegant, and utterly monstrous deception. He went home that evening in a daze. He saw Lena in the garden, tending to the roses that were just beginning to bloom. She looked up and smiled at him, and the purity of that smile, the unquestioning love in her eyes, was like a knife in his heart. She was a part of this too, an unknowing prisoner in the same cage. His fear of forgetting her was now dwarfed by a new, more terrifying fear. What if the echo of a true memory, a phantom resonance, was not a blessing but a curse? To be the one person in a world of blissful ignorance who remembers a love that no one else believes ever existed. To be haunted by a ghost that only you can see. He walked towards her, the setting sun casting their long shadows on the grass. He had a choice. He could bury this secret, live with the terrible knowledge and protect her from the truth. Or he could tell her and risk shattering the foundation of their entire world, their love, everything they held dear. As he reached her, she took his hand, her touch as familiar as his own heartbeat. "You look troubled, my love," she said, her voice laced with concern. He looked into her eyes, the eyes of the woman he would love across time and forgetting. The secret sat on his tongue, heavy and toxic. Could he share this burden? Or would the truth be the one thing their love couldn't survive? The weeks following Elias's discovery were a silent torment. He moved through his life like a phantom, the world now rendered in 2 layers, the serene, pastel-colored surface everyone else saw, and the dark, churning machinery he knew lay beneath. Every interaction was tainted by this dual vision. When he helped Maya with her breakfast, he saw not just his aging down daughter, but a victim of a grand memory-wiping experiment. When he watched Samuel race off on his motorcycle, he saw not just a reckless youth, but a consciousness deliberately stripped of its hard-won wisdom. And when he held Lena, her warmth and love felt both more precious and tragically fragile, a beautiful flower growing in a high-tech prison. He chose silence. The truth was a poison, and he could not bring himself to administer it to the person he loved most. He told himself he was protecting her, but a darker, more selfish thought whispered that he was protecting himself, protecting the fragile illusion of their shared reality, because he was terrified of what might happen if it shattered. So he carried the burden alone, and the weight of it began to show. He grew distant, lost in thought. There were dark circles under his eyes. The first trial came not from the grand conspiracy, but from the simple, painful mechanics of their daily lives. It began with a call from the city enforcers. Samuel had been arrested. He and his friends had used an industrial grav lifter to scale the side of the old Zenith Tower, one of the tallest structures in the city, to watch the sunrise. It was a profoundly stupid, incredibly dangerous act of youthful rebellion. Elias found him in a holding cell, looking less like a defiant rebel and more like a sullen, frightened boy. He sat on the narrow bench, his head in his hands, the bravado gone. "Are you hurt?" wasn't the first thing Elias asked, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and relief. Samuel shook his head, not looking up. "Kira sprained her wrist. They're letting us go with a fine and civic duty. Mostly just wanted to scare us." Elias let out a long, slow breath. He sat down on the bench, the space between them feeling like a mile-wide canyon. "Sam, what were you thinking?" "I wasn't," Samuel mumbled. "That was the point. Just to feel something. To not think." He finally looked up, his eyes pleading. "You don't get it, Eli. You're in the sweet spot. You're strong. You remember everything. Me, I'm losing things. Every day. Little pieces. The name of a book you loved. The reason we moved to this house. It's like my head is full of holes. So I try to fill them with now. With noise. With the wind rushing past my face. Anything to stop noticing what's missing." The confession hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. He had been so focused on the man Samuel was that he had failed to see the struggle of the young man he is. He wasn't just being reckless. He was terrified. He was running from the same void that haunted Elias, but in a different direction. "The man who raised me," Elias began, his voice cracking. "The man whose memories are fading inside you. He was brave, but he wasn't reckless. His bravery was in facing things, not running from them. He faced the grief of his wife's fading. He faced the challenge of raising me alone. He stood his ground." "Well, I'm not him," Samuel exploded, jumping to his feet. "I'm not him, Elias. He's a ghost. A story you keep trying to shove me inside. I don't remember being that man. I don't remember raising you. All I have is your word, and these journals filled with stories that feel like they happened to someone else. I love you, I know I do. It's a feeling, an instinct. But the history, it's not mine. This body is mine, this moment is mine. And you keep trying to take that away from me by making me a memorial to a dead man." The words "dead man" hung in the sterile air of the cell. In a way, he was right. Elias was mourning a man who was standing right in front of him. He was trying to preserve a ghost, and in doing so, he was suffocating the living boy. It was a profound failure of love on his part, a selfishness born of his own grief. "You're right," Elias said, the admission costing him dearly. "I'm sorry, Sam. I miss him. And I haven't been fair to you." The anger drained from Samuel's face, replaced by a weary sadness. "I miss him too," he said quietly, "even though I don't know who he was." They walked home in silence, a fragile truce between them. Elias paid the fine. He had faced a trial and realized his own failing. He had to learn to love the son his father had become, not just the father his son used to be. But the encounter left a deep fissure in his soul. Samuel's cry, "It's like my head is full of holes," was the direct, engineered result of the unwinding protocol. The suffering was not a bug. It was a feature. His anger at the unseen architects of their world hardened into a cold, dense resolve. The second trial was quieter, but cut even deeper. A few nights later, he was helping Maya prepare for bed. She was more lucid than she had been in months, her body's rejuvenation briefly sharpening her mind. She was looking at an old physical photograph, a rarity in their digital world. It showed a stern-looking woman in her late 80s, standing on a windswept beach. "I remember her," Maya said, her voice clear and certain. "This was just after my arrival. She was the head of integration. Her name was Iona." Elias frowned. "Maya, that's not in your journal. Your integration officer was a man named Kale." He had written that chapter himself. "No," Maya insisted, her gaze fixed on the photo. "It was her. She was very strict. She told me the rules. She said that memory is a river, and we must let it flow away, or we will drown in it." I never forgot her face. She looked up at Elias, her eyes filled with a strange, fleeting clarity. "You're trying to build a dam, aren't you, Elias? I can see it in your eyes. Be careful. The river always wins." Then, as quickly as it came, the moment of lucidity passed. Her eyes clouded over, her focus softened, and she looked back at the photo with a vague, pleasant confusion. "What a lovely picture," she murmured. "Is she family?" Elias stood frozen, the photograph in his hand. Maya had a real memory. A memory that was not from her journal. A phantom resonance, just like Dr. Thorne had described. It was a crack in the porcelain facade of her fabricated life. The woman, Iona, had spoken of the rules, of letting memory flow away. Was she just a standard government employee or something more? Was she a guardian of the system? A keeper of the secrets? He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. The conspiracy wasn't just in ancient, hidden logs. It was here, in his own home. Its agents had spoken to his own daughter, and Maya's warning, delivered from a brief island of true memory in a sea of fiction, felt like a direct message. Be careful. The river always wins. Was it a threat? A piece of advice from someone who knew the truth? He tucked Maya into bed, his hands trembling. He had thought he was alone in his knowledge, an isolated observer. But now he felt like a player in a game whose rules he was only just beginning to understand. There were others who knew, people who were actively maintaining the lie. They had been close enough to touch his family. He went back to his study, the photograph of Iona clutched in his hand. The 2 trials of that week had revealed more than just his own character. They had revealed the nature of his prison. It was not a passive system. It was actively managed. Samuel's suffering was a designed outcome. Maya's true memories were a monitored anomaly. He wasn't just fighting against a philosophical concept. He was fighting against a hidden, organized power. His secret was no longer just a burden. It was a danger. If Maya could have a phantom memory, who was to say others couldn't? What if someone else remembered something more significant? What if the ghosts in the machine started to talk? The people maintaining this system would surely do anything to ensure their silence. He looked at the face of the stern woman in the photograph, her eyes seeming to watch him from across the decades. He had tried to be a passive keeper of a terrible truth, but the world was forcing his hand. He had to know more. He had to know who these people were and how deep the deception went. His quiet, internal crusade had just become terrifyingly real. The question was no longer just about memory and love, but about power and control. And as he stared at the woman's face, he had to wonder, was he the hunter, Or was he the one being hunted? The face of the woman named Iona became Elias's obsession. It was a ghost haunting the edges of his vision, a key to a door he desperately needed to unlock. His work at the memory archives transformed from a mournful duty into a feverish investigation. He abandoned the restoration of mundane journals and dove headfirst into the restricted sections, using the Janus protocol access he'd discovered as his skeleton key. He cross-referenced arrival records, integration officer assignments, and civic administration rosters from 20 years ago, the time of Maya's arrival. He searched for Iona. He found nothing. Her name did not appear in any official capacity. It was as if she had never existed. This absence was more damning than any record. A person in a position of authority, a head of integration, would leave a vast data trail. Her complete lack of one meant her records had been deliberately and meticulously scrubbed. This was not the work of a simple bureaucrat. This was the work of an organization with immense power and reach, an organization dedicated to maintaining its own invisibility. Frustrated, Elias changed his tactics. He abandoned the direct search for Iona and instead focused on the anomaly she represented: phantom memory resonance. He dug back into Dr. Aris Thorne's logs from the first cycle. He found fragmented, corrupted entries that spoke of a contingency. When the resonance proved more persistent than anticipated, a subgroup was formed. Dr. Thorne had called them the Janus Keepers, and their mandate was twofold: to identify and monitor individuals experiencing resonance, and to reinforce the benevolent narrative, ensuring these memory cracks did not destabilize the system. They were the gardeners of the great lie, pruning away any shoots of truth that threatened to sprout. The logs were ancient and incomplete, but they provided a profile. The keepers were often recruited from families who showed a high degree of cycle compliance. They were true believers, people who saw the unwinding not as a prison, but as a salvation. They saw the truth as a dangerous contagion, and themselves as the physicians tasked with containing it. The logs hinted that the keepers passed their knowledge down through generations, not in journals, but through private tutelage, when a child had grown young enough to be deemed trustworthy and indoctrinated, usually in their late 40s or early 50s, the age of peak cognitive function and emotional maturity. Elias sat back, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening clarity. The woman, Iona, was a Janus keeper. Her interaction with Maya wasn't a standard integration briefing. It was an assessment. She was checking to see if Maya's own phantom memories posed a threat. Her words, "Memory is a river, and we must let it flow away, or we will drown in it," wasn't just a philosophical platitude. It was the core tenet of the Keeper's creed. The revelation was terrifying. This wasn't a faceless system. It was a conspiracy of people. His neighbors, his colleagues, even his friends could be keepers. He felt a wave of paranoia wash over him. Who could he trust? Every conversation now seemed layered with hidden meaning, every pleasantry a potential test. His gaze fell upon Lena. She had always been a bastion of stability, a firm believer in the grace of the cycle. Her family was old and respected, known for their unwavering civic duty and cycle compliance. Her great-grandfather had been one of the city's founders during the second cycle. The thought was a venomous serpent slithering into the Eden of his mind, so vile he immediately tried to crush it. Lena? His Lena? Impossible. She was the most honest, transparent person he had ever known. Their love was built on a foundation of absolute trust. To suspect her was to suspect the very core of his own life. He pushed the thought away, ashamed of his own paranoia. His investigation needed a new direction. If he couldn't find the keepers, perhaps he could find more of their mistakes, more cracks in the wall. He began cross-referencing civic incident reports, accidents, arrests, psychological episodes, with a search for keywords associated with memory anomalies. Déjà vu, phantom limb, unexplained nostalgia, anachronistic knowledge. He spent sleepless nights sifting through mountains of data, his eyes burning from the screen's glow. And then he found it. A pattern. Over the last century, there had been a small but consistent number of cognitive dissonance episodes, CDEs. The official explanation was always stress-induced psychosis related to the pressures of the unwinding. The individuals would claim to remember things they couldn't possibly know, technologies from previous cycles, people who didn't exist in their journals, even snippets of linear time, of a world where people grew old and died. In every case, the individual was quietly institutionalized at a specific high-security sanatorium on the city's remote northern coast, the Stillwater Institute. They were never seen again. Stillwater. It wasn't a hospital. It was a prison. A place where the keepers sent the people whose memories were too loud, too dangerous to be allowed to echo. It was where they sent the system's failures. A cold dread filled Elias. Was this where they sent Subject 7, Orion, the man who dreamt of Seraphina? Was it filled with people who had loved so fiercely their memories had survived the great erasure, only to be punished for it? He had to know. But Stillwater was a fortress. Access was impossible. He was at another dead end. Defeated, he closed the files and went to find Lena. He needed to feel her presence, to let her steady calm chase away the shadows that were consuming him. He found her in their bedroom, sitting by the window, a small, lacquered box on her lap. It was the box her mother had given her before she faded, a family heirloom. Elias had always assumed it was just a keepsake box for jewelry. But Lena wasn't looking at jewelry. She was holding a small crystalline data chip up to the moonlight, her expression unreadable. "Lena," he said, his voice hesitant. She started, quickly hiding the chip back in the box and snapping the lid shut. Her movements were furtive, guilty. "Elias, you startled me." "You? What's that?" he asked, his heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat. "Oh, nothing," she said, her smile a little too bright, a little too forced. "Just old family trinkets, you know, silly, sentimental things." But Elias had seen the chip. It wasn't a standard issue data slate. It was an old model, high density and encrypted, the kind used for secure archival, the kind he had only ever seen in the deepest, most restricted levels of the city archives. The kind that might hold, for instance, the true history of a family of Janus keepers. The vile, venomous thought he had tried to crush came roaring back, its fangs sinking deep into his heart. Her family's perfect cycle compliance, her unshakable belief in the system, her mother's keepsake box. It all coalesced into a single horrifying conclusion. "Lena," he said, his voice trembling, the room seeming to tilt around him. "What is on that chip?" She looked at him, and for the first time in their 23 years together, he saw a stranger. The warmth in her eyes was gone, replaced by a guarded, sorrowful depth he had never seen before. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was a confession. "You know," he whispered, the words tasting like ash, "you've always known." Lena's carefully composed expression finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a river carving a canyon through the landscape of their life. "Elias," she began, her voice a fragile whisper, "I wanted to protect you." "Protect me?" he choked out, a bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling in his throat. "Protect me from what?" "The truth. My own life. Our life, Lena. Has it all been a lie?" The secret was out. not discovered in a dusty archive, but revealed in the tear-streaked face of the woman he loved. The ultimate revelation was not about the world, but about his own home. The keeper of the greatest secret was not a shadowy agent in the distance, but the person sleeping beside him every night. He had been searching for the cracks in the world's foundation, only to find the deepest one running right through the heart of his own marriage. And he had to wonder, as he stared at the woman who was both his wife and his warden, what other secrets was she keeping in that small lacquered box? The silence that fell between them was not empty. It was dense and suffocating, filled with the weight of 23 years of unspoken truths. The familiar comfort of their bedroom felt alien, the moonlight casting sharp, unfamiliar shadows. Elias stared at Lena, trying to reconcile the woman he had loved, the woman he had built a life with the stranger sitting before him, the keeper of a world-altering secret. It was like looking at a photograph and its negative simultaneously. "How?" Elias finally managed to ask, his voice a raw, broken thing. "How could you not tell me?" Lena flinched as if he had struck her. She clutched the lacquered box to her chest like a shield. "My mother told me when I was 50, she said, her voice quiet and strained, just as her mother told her. "It is our family's burden, our duty. We are Janus keepers." The name spoken aloud in their bedroom felt like a profanity. "Duty," Elias spat the word. "You call it a duty to uphold a lie, to watch people live and love and suffer in a cage and do nothing, to let them forget their true selves." "What is a true self, Elias?" Lena shot back, a flash of fire in her tear-filled eyes. She stood up, her composure returning, forged in the crucible of a lifetime of secrecy. "Is it the self that is born, grows frail and dies in terror of the abyss? The self that is ravaged by disease and torn apart by sudden, meaningless loss? Our ancestors lived that life. They called it linear. They watched their children die, their parents wither. They lived under the constant crushing tyranny of an irreversible timeline. They had knowledge, yes, but it was a knowledge steeped in pain and the certainty of oblivion." She gestured wildly around the room at the city beyond the window. They engineered the unwinding as an act of compassion. They chose a gentle decline over a violent end. They chose the peace of forgetting over the agony of remembering a lifetime of pain. We don't uphold a lie, Elias. We preserve a mercy, a terrible, unbearable mercy. Her words were a torrent, a dam of conviction bursting. She believed it. Every word. She was not a monster. She was a zealot, a true believer in the benevolent narrative. "Mercy?" Elias was incredulous. "You call what Samuel is going through mercy? The terror of his mind falling apart? You call what we do for Maya, tending to her like a dying plant, mercy? We are professional mourners for the living, Lena. It's a slow, drawn-out torture." "It is a slow, managed goodbye," she insisted, her voice rising. "It is a world without orphans, a world where you get to see your parents young and strong again, where you get to care for your children as they find vitality. Don't you see the beauty in the symmetry? The love?" "I see the beauty we create," Elias countered, his voice shaking with a cold fury. "The love we pour into the cracks of this broken system. That beauty is ours, Lena, not the system's. The system is what steals it all away in the end. It's a thief that takes everything, and you are one of its guards." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and glittering. The betrayal was no longer just about the secret. It was about a fundamental, irreconcilable difference in their view of the world. He saw a prison. She saw a sanctuary. He saw stolen memories. She saw freedom from pain. What about Stillwater Institute? He pressed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Is that part of the mercy, too? Locking people away because their memories are too strong? Because they loved someone in a pre-cycle life so much that your perfect system couldn't erase it? Lena's face went pale. The fire in her eyes died, replaced by a deep, haunted sorrow. We don't have a choice, she whispered. Resonance is like a virus. If it spreads, if people begin to believe there was a world before this one, a real life that was stolen from them, the existential despair would shatter our civilization. It would be a psychological plague. The peace would be broken. Stillwater. Stillwater is a quarantine. It is the price of serenity for the many. The cold, clinical logic of it made Elias feel sick. The price of peace. The sacrifice of the few for the comfort of the masses. He thought of Dr. Thorne's log, of Orion, and his love for Seraphina. He wasn't a system anomaly. He was a sacrifice. So you knew, Elias said, the realization dawning with a sickening finality. Every time I came home, tortured by my work, by the fading memories, every time I spoke of my fears of forgetting you, you knew it was all by design. You watched me suffer, and you stayed silent. This was the heart of the betrayal. Not the cosmic lie, but the intimate one. The shared glances, the comforting words, the nights spent holding each other. All of it was now tainted. He had been navigating a storm, and she, his lighthouse, had known the path all along, but had chosen to watch him struggle against the waves. I did it because I love you, she pleaded, tears flowing freely now. The truth would have destroyed you, Elias. I saw it. I see it now. It's a knowledge that isolates. It makes the world a nightmare. I wanted to spare you that. I wanted us to have our time, our beautiful, perfect time in the sun before the forgetting. I wanted you to have peace. I don't want peace, he roared, the sound ripping from his throat, raw and full of anguish. I want truth. I want a real life with real love and real pain. I want the right to my own memories, not the curated fictions you and your keepers spoon-feed us. You didn't protect me, Lena. You trapped me. You made my life, our life, a lie. He backed away from her, stumbling toward the door. He couldn't breathe in that room anymore. The air was thick with her terrible mercy. He saw the lacquered box on the floor where she had dropped it. Inside was the history of their division, the proof of the chasm that had just opened up between them. Elias, please, she begged, reaching for him. Don't do this. Where will you go? He looked at her, at the woman who was the center of his universe, and felt a pain so profound it was like a part of his soul was being amputated. I don't know, he said, his voice hollow. But I can't stay here. I can't live in this beautiful gilded cage you're so proud of. He turned and walked out of the room, out of their shared life. Each step was an agony. He walked past Samuel's room, past Maya's. He walked down the stairs and out the front door, into the cold night air. The city hummed around him, a clockwork mechanism of blissful ignorance. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The crisis was not an explosion or a battle. It was a quiet, devastating schism. His marriage was broken. His worldview was shattered. He was a man without a home, without an anchor. The Janus keepers, the secret society he had been hunting, were not some shadowy cabal of villains. They were people like Lena, people who believed they were doing the right thing. And that somehow was the most terrifying part of all. They weren't evil. They were tragically, monstrously compassionate. He stood on the street, the cool breeze doing nothing to quell the fire in his soul. He had the truth, but the truth had cost him everything. He now faced a world he could no longer trust, and a future he had to face alone. As he looked up at the uncaring moon, he knew he had to make a choice. He could not go back, so he had to go forward. But what path was there for a man who had declared war on the very architecture of his reality? The days that followed were a blur of grey anonymity. Elias checked into a sterile Kron motel in the city's industrial sector, a place where people in transit between life stages stayed, a place of profound impermanence. He was a ghost in his own city. He walked the streets, seeing the world through a new, agonizingly clear lens. He saw the keepers everywhere now, in the gentle, knowing smile of a librarian guiding a newly arrived elder through their journal, in the firm but kind tone of an enforcer calming a panicking, memory-frayed teenager, in the subtle, shared glances between certain civic officials. They were the silent shepherds of this flock, and he, the lone wolf, was now outside the fence. He was adrift, but he was not without purpose. The rage and betrayal had cooled, solidifying into a diamond-hard resolve. He could not accept Lena's unbearable mercy. He could not stand by while the system continued its silent, soul-crushing work. He had to act. But how? He saw 3 paths laid out before him, each one a different kind of damnation. The first path was the path of fire, revelation. He still had his access to the Janus protocol. He could download Dr. Thorne's logs, the records of Stillwater, the truth about the unwinding. He could release it all onto the civic data net. He could tear the veil from the world's eyes and show them the cage they were in. The thought held a certain righteous appeal. The truth, raw and unfiltered. But then he envisioned the consequences. He saw the mass panic, the existential terror. He saw families turning on each other, the lie of the journals becoming a source of violent recrimination. He saw the fragile, managed peace of their society collapsing into chaos and despair. Lena had called it a psychological plague, and she was right. To choose this path would be to burn down the world out of spite. It was not justice. It was nihilism. He could not do it. It was a vengeance, not a solution. The second path was the path of ice, surrender. He could go back to Lena. He could try to understand. He could accept the truth as a burden he must carry in silence. Perhaps the keepers would even recruit him, seeing his discovery not as a threat, but as an inadvertent initiation. He could live out his days with Lena, sharing the terrible secret, finding solace in their love, and allowing the unwinding to eventually wash the knowledge away. He could have his wife back. He could have his home back. The temptation was immense, a siren song of comfort and forgiveness. But the thought of it made his stomach churn. It would be a betrayal of himself, of the man in the dream who told him not to let them take his memories. It would be a betrayal of every soul in Stillwater, of Orion and his lost Seraphina. To choose this path would be to die long before his body faded. It was a comfortable grave, but a grave nonetheless. That left the third path, the path of shadow and whispers, the path of true rebellion. Elias returned to the archives, moving like a wraith in the dead of night. He bypassed security with his high-level credentials, his heart a cold, steady rhythm in his chest. He wasn't just looking for information anymore. He was looking for a weapon. He dug deeper into the Janus protocol, past the logs and contingencies, into the core programming of the unwinding itself. It was a labyrinth of code so complex it seemed almost organic, a digital god. and in its very heart he found what he was looking for. It was a subroutine labeled protocol sundering. It was not a simple off switch. It was far more radical. Dr. Thorne had designed it as the ultimate failsafe, a break glass in case of tyranny option. The notes were chilling. Activating the sundering would not simply stop the unwinding. It would send a cascading resonance pulse through the entire system, targeting the induced amnesia. It wouldn't restore all memories. That was impossible, the data was long gone. But it was designed to shatter the barrier between the fabricated journals and the deep, instinctual, phantom resonance. It would force a reconciliation. The predicted result? No one knew for sure. Dr. Thorne's simulations were inconclusive. It could trigger widespread awakening, allowing millions to access the faint ghosts of their pre-cycle selves, the echoes of true love, real grief, and linear lives. It could give them back a piece of their stolen souls. Or the resonance cascade could be too much for the human psyche to handle. It could cause a global schism in consciousness, madness on an unimaginable scale. Or it could simply sever the connection between consciousness and the physical world, resulting in a silent, instantaneous mass fading, an extinction event. It was the ultimate gamble, a choice between a beautiful prison, a chaotic truth, or total annihilation. Elias stared at the activation prompt on his screen, a single, glowing button. Initiate sundering. His finger hovered over it. He had the power to remake the world or to destroy it. Who was he to make that choice? A broken-hearted memory archivist? An arrogant man playing God? He thought of his family. He thought of Maya, content in her gentle confusion. The sundering might grant her a moment of true memory of her pre-cycle life, only to rip her from the peaceful ignorance she currently inhabited. He thought of Samuel, vibrant and alive, finally finding his footing in the now. The sundering might flood his mind with the memories of the old man he once was, crushing the youth he was fighting so hard to claim. And he thought of Lena. This act would be a declaration of war against everything she believed in, everything she had dedicated her life to protecting. It would be his final, ultimate rejection of her love and her worldview. He closed his eyes. The weight of billions of lives, past, present, and future, seemed to press down on him. Was freedom worth the risk of annihilation? Was the ghost of a forgotten truth worth more than a tangible, peaceful lie? He remembered Lena's words. We preserve a mercy. He remembered Maya's warning. The river always wins. His choice was not just about the world. It was about him. What kind of man was he? Was he a preserver or a destroyer? A shepherd or a revolutionary? He had railed against the architects of their world for their hubris, for making a choice on behalf of all humanity. If he pressed this button, would he not be guilty of the exact same sin? He took a deep, shuddering breath. He opened his eyes. His decision made. It was not a choice between the three paths he had envisioned. It was a choice to forge a fourth. He would not burn the world down, nor would he surrender to it, nor would he risk its utter destruction on a theoretical chance at freedom. His rebellion would have to be smaller, more personal, but no less profound. He couldn't save the world. He couldn't even be sure if it needed saving. But he could save a memory, his love for Lena. That was the one true thing in his universe, even now in its shattered state. He began to type, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was not activating the sundering. He was using his access to the core programming for something else. He was creating a new file, burying it in the deepest, most inaccessible part of the code. He was creating a single protected memory packet, encoding it with a unique biological signature, his own and Lena's. He was taking the phantom resonance anomaly and turning it into a deliberate message. He was building his own ghost in the machine. He didn't know if it would work. It was a message in a bottle, thrown into a cosmic ocean. A single, indelible image. Lena's face at the midlife gala. Her smile as she quoted Theron's philosophy. A memory of their beginning. It was his personal act of defiance. He would not let them take her from him, not completely. If their minds were to be erased, he would leave an echo behind, a whisper in the code of their reality, a testament to the fact that they had been here, that they had loved. He finished his work, sealed the file, and erased his tracks. The sundering protocol remained untouched, a sleeping god he had chosen not to wake. He was exhausted, drained, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a sliver of peace. He had made his choice. He had not chosen fire or ice. He had chosen love. A desperate, defiant, eternal love. He left the archives and walked out into the pre-dawn light. The city was beginning to wake, its gentle hum a familiar song. He knew what he had to do next. He had to go home. Not to surrender, but to live. To live out the unwinding, to embrace the sorrow and the beauty, armed with his one secret act of rebellion. He had to see Lena. He had to face the woman he loved, the woman who had betrayed him, and try to build a new kind of truth in the ruins of the old one. The question was no longer what he would do to the world, but what he would do with the time he had left. Could a love, shattered by the truth, ever be truly mended? And could his secret message in a bottle ever hope to reach its destination across the vast, empty ocean of forgetting? He walked home as the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and bruised purple. The journey felt different this time. He was not running away, nor was he surrendering. He was returning, a soldier coming home from a war only he knew he had fought. He had faced the abyss and chosen not to leap, but to build a single tiny bridge of his own making. Lena was in the kitchen, her back to the door. She stood perfectly still, a mug of synth coffee untouched on the counter beside her. She looked as if she hadn't slept. When she heard his footsteps, she didn't turn. Her shoulders tensed. "I didn't press the button," Elias said softly. The words filled the space between them. He wasn't talking about a physical button, but the metaphorical one of revelation and destruction. She would understand. She would. She turned around slowly. Her face was a mask of exhaustion and heartbreak, but beneath it, a flicker of profound relief. "I know," she whispered. "The keepers have monitors on the core protocols. Any attempt to access sundering would have triggered a system-wide alarm. The fact that I am still standing here, and not in an interrogation cell, means you chose peace." "I didn't choose peace," Elias corrected gently. "I didn't choose your peace anyway. I chose us." He walked closer, stopping a few feet away. The chasm was still there, but it no longer felt impassable. "I will never agree with the lie, Lena. I will never believe that this cage is a mercy. But I spent the last few days imagining a world without you. And it was a world without color, without meaning. The truth shattered us. But our love, it was real before we knew the truth. It has to be real enough to exist alongside it." Tears welled in her eyes. The first he had seen that were not of grief, but of a fragile, dawning hope. "But how, Elias? I am what I am, a keeper. And you know the truth. You can't unknow it. We will always stand on opposite sides of this. Then we will love each other from across the divide," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We will live our lives, knowing the terrible, beautiful, monstrous truth. We won't pretend it doesn't exist, but we will not let it be the only thing that exists. We will have this time, our years of clarity, and we will make them count. We will fill them with so much life, so much love, that it will be a rebellion in itself. It was not a perfect forgiveness. It was a difficult, painful armistice, a choice to build something new in the rubble. Lena took a hesitant step toward him, and then another, until she was in his arms, her face buried in his chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. He held her tightly, the familiar scent of her hair, the feel of her form against his, a homecoming more profound than any house or city. And so they began the second act of their life together. It was different. The easy, blissful ignorance was gone, replaced by a constant, low-humming tension. There were conversations they could not have, thoughts they could not share. He saw the subtle signs of her keeper duties, a coded message on her datapad, a hushed conversation with a colleague. She saw the sadness in his eyes when he looked at Samuel or Maya, a sadness she now understood was not just grief, but a quiet rage against the system she upheld. But they kept their promise. They filled their days. They traveled. They learned new skills. They loved with a fierce, desperate intensity, as if to spite the encroaching tide of forgetting. Elias never spoke of his secret act of rebellion, his message in the bottle. It was his alone, a private hope he nurtured in the quiet of his own heart. The years flowed by, and the unwinding continued its relentless work. Maya, his daughter, became a vibrant woman in her 40s, then a rebellious teenager, then a sweet-natured child. Her memories of her adulthood long since vanished into the river. One day, Elias found Samuel, now a strong and gentle man of 40, sitting in Maya's room, patiently reading to the little girl who was, by a trick of time, his grandmother. The symmetry was heartbreakingly beautiful, just as Lena had said. Elias and Lena grew younger too. Their 40s bled into their 30s. Their minds were still sharp, but the edges of their oldest memories began to soften. The sharp pain of their great schism faded into a dull, historical ache. They were no longer keeper and rebel. They were simply Elias and Lena, a man and a woman bound by a love that had weathered an impossible storm. Then came their 20s. They were full of energy, falling in love all over again, drawn to each other by an instinct they couldn't explain. They would walk by the sea, and he would feel a strange, powerful urge to tell her about a woman in a silver dress at a gala. But the details were foggy, like a dream half remembered. She would look at him and feel a deep, unexplainable sense of safety, of home. Then came their childhood. They played in the same parks, attended the same schools, cared for by their children and their children's children. They were best friends, inseparable, a boy and a girl linked by a bond that no one, least of all them, could understand. The final scene of his life was quiet and bathed in soft light. Elias was an infant, lying in a cradle in a communal nursery. His mind was a blank slate, the great forgetting almost complete. He had no words, no memories, only sensations. Warmth, light, the soft texture of a blanket. In the cradle next to his lay a baby girl with wide, curious eyes, Lena. She was also on the cusp of fading. Their journey was at its end. He felt a random infantile impulse. He reached out his tiny, fumbling hand. His fingers brushed against hers. And then, something impossible happened. It was not a memory. It was not a thought. It was a flicker, a spark in the void. For a fraction of a second, an image bloomed in the vast emptiness of his consciousness, as clear and bright as a diamond. A woman's face, a smile, a silver dress, a voice that whispered a line of philosophy. The image was gone as quickly as it came, leaving no trace, no understanding. It was just a ghost, an echo. His message had arrived. The infant Elias did not know what he had seen, but he felt a sensation, a feeling of profound, inexplicable joy, a warmth that had nothing to do with his blanket. He turned his head and looked at the baby girl beside him. Her eyes were looking at him, and in their clear, memoryless depths, he saw a flicker of the same light, the same impossible recognition, a ghost of a memory, an echo of a love so powerful it had bent the rules of reality. He smiled, a gurgling baby's smile. She smiled back. And then, as peacefully as a candle flame in a windless room, he faded. He was gone. The unwinding was complete. The story of Elias and Lena was over. Their memories were erased, their lives forgotten. But was it a tragedy? Or was it the ultimate triumph? He had not saved the world. He had not broken the cage. But he had proven that even in a world designed to make you forget, a love that is true, a love that is fought for, does not simply vanish. It leaves an echo, a whisper in the dawn, a ghost in the machine that says, against all odds, we were here. And perhaps in any world, linear or reversed, that is the only kind of immortality that truly matters.